Hello and welcome to how to play every single faction in Total War Warhammer 2. Now I have guides for every faction, but watching them would take you like a week, so I decided to put some quick tips for every single faction inside of one video to make things simple for you. Now we have a fair bit to go through, so let's dive right in.
Is that the last donut with red, white, and blue sprinkles?
No.
The High Elves, the Order-Tide faction based around trade to create one of the most robust economies in the game. They use their trade agreements to gain intel into the lands of other factions, and they can optionally stab them in the back for profit. They can also utilize influence to manipulate relations between other factions to either make them get along great or break them up with the power of gossip. In battle, they hold snootiness and training above all. Your armies fight best when at full health, and as they become injured, their training starts to wear off. They have one of the best ranged rosters in the game with outstanding range and eventually outstanding damage to match. Not too bad at all on the front lines either, and they also get a few monsters. On top of this, they also get access to a fair few laws of magic. You can play defensively and pick the enemy off as they come to you, and take them to pieces from halfway across the map. This makes them a fantastic turtling faction. The Dark Elves, edgy cousins of the High Elves that may or may not be into practicing incest. Surprisingly, they're also into a bit of bondage too, so make most of their money from slaves. Aside from this, they also rule the waves with their powerful Black Ark units, so I suppose they're doing their best Empire of the United Kingdom impersonation. If you haven't guessed by now from their appearance, they are firmly out of the Order-Tide, but are still civil enough to be possible members of the Evil Alliance if one manages to form, as rare as that may be. In battle, conversely to their cousins, the Dark Elves much more focused on all-out offense rather than defense, with less range overall, but higher damage within that range, especially in the early game. They also lean into magic a lot more, with a lot of units relying on resistance instead of armor, causing their less than modest appearance. They have a great balance of infantry, monsters, and cav, so are a great fit for a variety of playstyles. They also have a decent roster of magic, with most of them being focused on all-out offense, unsurprisingly. Overall, they can adopt a variety of playstyles and strategies, making them into a great faction for flexible players who want to try out different things in the same campaign. Lizardmen, ancient followers of the Great Plan, which is of course to feed Master Mundi until he is finally full. Their campaign gameplay is based around building up a literal network of settlements and allies to achieve high levels of enlightenment and more powerful commandments. Yes, I'm serious, it sounds really lame, but it actually can be really strong. And besides, look at the pretty lines. Aside from that, they are technically a member of Team Order-Tide, but with a bit of a caveat. As with most factions in Warhammer, they are a little intolerant to other races, but above all they hate chaos, so anyone that shares this sentiment they'll get along with well enough to call them allies. In battle, of course, a faction like this is led by sexy frogmen and has some incredible reptilian-inspired units. Their roster is jacked full of lizards and dinosaurs of all kinds, from your standard frontlines bipeds to your gigantic bus-sized quadrupeds. They even have lizards that fire missiles, both from eating a single Taco Bell meal and from contraptions held together with ancient magic. Speaking of which, they have a great selection of laws for damage and defense and can lead your armies or just back them up. Their playstyle can be defined as a kind of controlled rush. They're not going to have the most range, so in most situations you want to advance on the enemy as soon as you can and tear them up with your monsters, whilst your ranged units back you up.
Use a gun. And if that don't work, use more gun.
It's hard to know where to begin with the rats, because like any rats, they are so bathed in cheese that the lactose intolerant of you will start to feel gassy just being near them. Their campaign focuses on food more than anything. It's what allows you to sustain your armies, settlements, and more, and without it, you're not going to have a fun time. On top of this, you can use it to colonize settlements or whatever size you want, which means they can move into a place faster than a couple in a sitcom. They can also create undercities that are hidden settlements under other faction settlements that allow you to siphon gold, food, and more from the host, among some other even cheesier things. Finally, aside from this, they also have a chance to ambush when moving, which pre-nerf was basically cheating, but now is akin to some sort of vague hacking. Obviously, they are not Order-Tide and are pure chaos, because only a fool would trust a rat. Therefore, Maggio continues into battle, where with all their DLCs, they have units for every single occasion. They have great front lines for all-out melee battling, monsters for rolling through your opponents with ease, but by far the most ridiculous option they have is extraordinary ranged firepower. They have flamethrowers, catapults, grenade launchers, and even miniguns. They are basically a 60s tune away from being the US during the Vietnam War. But like the US during the Vietnam War, they also retreat once they lose even a shred of confidence, so don't be surprised if you see your units going back and forth constantly. With all their unit variety, they can adopt nearly any playstyle in the game, but the most overpowered one by far is turtling, with all their outrageous ranged troops. Tomb Kings are technically a part of the Order-Tide, but they're more in the camp of anyone who hates chaos is a friend of mine, rather than actively seeking to become best friends with everyone. They have a bit of a weird campaign with low income but low expenditure, with very few of their buildings generating gold, but none of their armies consuming it. In stereotypical desert faction, they also love pyramids and books of magic, and also have an irrational fear of Brendan Fraser. In battle, they are comprised of undead minions and giant constructs held together by magic. This results in a mix of a few powerful undead infantry units and a whole lot of super strong large units for a variety of situations. Whether you're going against infantry, monsters, or anything in between, they'll have something for you. They're also one of the first factions to acquire Roomba technology, so use them wisely to clean up your opponents. Despite having decent artillery, they still must push up to the enemy to make the most of their large units and prevent them from being picked off from afar. This makes their main strategy into a controlled advance with something held back to protect your precious back lines.
Do what you want, cause a pirate is free. You are a pirate. Yar har fiddle-dee-dee.
Yo ho, holy shit, the Vampire Coast have a weird-ass campaign. They have access to shipbuilding on their legendary lords, which basically allows them to become a horde faction and travel the world plundering in true pirate fashion. For some reason, they are also able to take settlements though, so you can never really fully embrace this pirate lifestyle because of the constant concern of economy and empire management. How very piratey. Aside from that, they do have a very fun pirates playstyle. Procure precious prizes, pillage pieces of 8, and collect verses of a legendary shanty to show the world, old and new, what music really is. If you played Empire Total War and really want a sequel, then look no further. The vampires in battle are so full of gun infantry that sometimes you forget you're playing Warhammer and start looking in your lines for a drummer. Set them up and watch them tear apart the enemy lines with decent range and strong damage. But don't even think about keeping them defended from enemy units, as one unit in front of these lads and they will refuse to shoot for fear of friendly firing your units who are technically already dead. Aside of this, you also have some of the strongest monsters in the game, and they come in a variety of piratey flavors, such as crab, bigger crab, and even bigger boat monster. They have a very unique playstyle of their gunner lines, but the main thing you end up doing is turtling, since you can outrange nearly everyone else nearby and force them to come to you.
Your new empire?
The Empire are what you get when a historical Total War fan creates a faction in Warhammer. They really have the bare minimum in terms of fantasy elements, but still somehow being one of the most consistently strong factions in the game. The faction is based on an intricate government system based on uniting the different states in one nation under Sigmar by getting them all to like you to the point where they'll just surrender control to you. Aside from this, they don't really have anything else aside from being firm members of Team Orderside and printing money in most games. The tiny bit of fantasy flavouring continues into their battle lines, where you'll find an army almost entirely devoid of anything interesting. Sorry, anything fantasy. That being said, they do have one of the best all-round rosters in the game, with decent options in every category aside from monsters, and they even have a nice selection of Lords of Magic. The standard playstyle normally boils down to Steel, Faith and Gunpowder, which means using a combination of tough frontlines units, powerful ranged firepower, and a few casters and cav units to wear the enemy down over sustained combat. They can fall under a number of playstyles, but their predominant one is turtling followed by cav flanking for maximum damage.
It's our burn book. So we cut out girls' pictures from the yearbook, and then we wrote comments.
Up until recently, the Dwarves really came up short in comparison to their neighbours. After the update, they're back to pick on everyone, no matter their size. Their campaign is fairly basic, but has two distinct mechanics. The Great Book of Grudges is basically a record of all things wrong done to your faction in the campaign, and your leader repetitively stares at it in disgust. Having a lot of grudges means your settlement gets a little sassy and dispatches suicidal slayers to assist you in clearing it. The other mechanic is using Oath Gold to craft various items for your lords and heroes to assist them in battle. Pretty simple. It's not shocking to anyone that the Dwarves aren't a rush faction. With those little legs, they are not getting anywhere fast. They're more focused on heavy armor and heavy use of technology and progressively larger boomsticks. Their front lines are some of the toughest in the game, and their ranged firepower adds up to almost rival the rats. Almost. This combined with their incredibly high leadership causes them to be one of the best turtling factions in the game, and I believe they're the best at it bar none. They also have some light magic in the form of their runic magic, but it's not overly impactful, though it is quite fun.
Say it.
Vampire.
Vampire Count's my personal favourite faction, and looking at them now, it's challenging to explain why. When they came out, they were pretty unique, but these days they've been forgotten about and are sorely lacking some form of an update. Their campaign revolves around everyone's favourite thing, corruption. Spread it to destabilise your enemies and stabilise yourself, and waste turn after turn waiting for it to spread when you could be blazing through your enemies if you were playing any other faction. They also have the Raise Dead mechanic, which allows them to summon their own units from the dead, and if there have been any big battles nearby, this gives them a richer and more extensive pool to pull from. Finally, they can also invest in legendary vampiric bloodlines to unlock buffs for the faction, as well as semi-legendary lords to lead your armies. Unsurprisingly, the undead theme continues into the army, as it's chock full of shambling corpses of various creatures, alongside some monsters, which you could consider lesser vampires. Their primary playstyle is rush, since they are sorely lacking any ranged units whatsoever, and they also have a number of strong units that play well into this. They have some of the most powerful shock cavalry in the game, alongside these monsters, meaning they can charge the enemy down before they have time to react. Of course, they also come with some unique vampiric magic that allows them to heal and resurrect units back to full HP, which is one of the most broken spells in the game. They also have a top-notch wind spell for tearing through even the toughest of enemy clumps in a single cast. If you're playing against the vampire count and you clump up your units, a Wind of Death is headed straight for them. Ever since their rework, the Greenskins have been on top form and dominated their area of the map with ease. Though this has slowed since the Dwarf rework, they are still a force to be reckoned with in the old world, because they're all to do with constant battling and momentum. They can use the tribe leader mechanic to take on the leaders of other Greenskin factions in battle to confederate their factions upon victory. They can utilize wars to summon reinforcements to every army for free, essentially doubling your military power to give you an edge over your opponents. Finally, they can use the spoils of war to craft upgrades for their units. Basically, if you're not fighting as the Greenskins, you're doing something wrong. Speaking of which, their roster is packed with all sorts of units based around all-out offense. They have one of the most robust and eventually high-damaging front lines in the entire game. Their ranged units are a little bit hit and miss, with most of the infantry being just okay, but some of them being fairly strong. Same thing with the artillery. They also bring some of the most incredible monsters to the table, both visually and also statistically. Finally, they also have a couple of unique laws of magic, one I could live without, and one that is godly and infamous for literally stomping over whatever you aim it at.
We have a very nice flint-tampon grand de Pont-Savance from the Goutson-Mousson Valley in Vézentin.
If there's one faction we all hate listening to in diplomacy, it's the Bretonnians, for their offensively over-the-top accents and simping over a lady. Unsurprisingly, their faction revolves around chivalry, which can be gained via opening the door for the lady, liking all her Instagram pictures, and of course, calling her a slut when she won't date you. Aside from this, generally chivalrous behavior in the campaign will cause this to go up. This is things such as not declaring war on other Bretonnians and not building any whorehouses. They also have a number of vows for each lord, which you must complete before using any of their elite units, which basically pulls your campaign to a grinding halt while you complete side quests for the pleasure of using your late game units. Finally, they also have an economy mostly based on peasants, and you have to balance the number of peasants you recruit into your army correctly, otherwise you'll be out a whole lot of gold. In combat, they are totally cav-centric, and if you know anything about me, you know this is the least attractive playstyle to me, so I avoid playing them like the plague, and I've literally been avoiding the plague for 2 years. The most powerful units are all cavalry, be they shock or sustained combat. If it's on a horse, chances are it's one of your best units. Aside from this, they have a mediocre selection of front lines units, a laughably small ranged roster, and a small selection of some underwhelming laws of magic. Their playstyle is a hammer and anvil, aside from less anvil and almost all hammer, since they just want to take so much bloody cav. Norska have the prize title of being the faction that has never had an update or rework, but also somehow not really being the worst, mainly because of the other factions who have never had a rework being so much more terrible. The faction is based around 3 things. Firstly, conquering all of Norska with the same tribe leader mechanic as the Greenskins. Take out a faction leader from Norska and boom, confederation. After that, they are based on raiding. They are based on Vikings, so sailing up and down the coastline, raiding wherever you can to make money is how they scrape by a living. Finally, they also want to achieve dedication to one of the 4 deities offering different tiers of rewards. Once you've done this, you need to decide whether you'll take out Chaos or join them, but no matter what, you have to remember they're still somehow not the worst. Throw in their monster hunting side quests and boom, you have a faction. In battle, the Vikings are focused almost entirely on monsters and monster hunters, alongside a ton of large units of varying quality and specialization, and of course, somehow have men literally walking around shirtless in snow and ice like a fat man from the UK on a hot day. Use their front lines combined with monstrous backup to bowl over the enemy with rushes that they cannot prepare or recover from. Apply pressure until they are taken out, otherwise you'll slowly get picked off. They also have a few laws of magic available to them, including the legendary law of fire, to get plenty of assistance and utility from there. If you'd have asked me a few months ago about the Beastmen, I would tell you not to bother unless you're an achievement hunter. But today, they're one of the most dominant forces in the game, with mechanics to roll almost anyone. They are a horde faction, so have no real settlements, but they can settle herd stones after raising settlements to start accumulating devastation towards their campaign goals. They can use these stones to afflict the surrounding area with all kinds of effects to assist in farming the settlements for devastation. They also recruit and upkeep units for free, and instead work on a capacity-based system like the Bonus City Boys, but instead recruit anywhere they want due to the horde, which makes them incredibly easy with no punishment for losing your units, aside from a slight delay to your movements, if that. They are busted, overpowered, and I beg that they get nerfed before Warhammer 2 is left to rot. In battle, they aren't quite as clearly over the top strong as they are, but they are still fairly powerful and always have been. They unsurprisingly utilize a large number of monstrous units to rush up to and through the enemy as quickly as possible to give them no time to react and set up to defend against you. Aside from the monsters, they also have some decent front lines and chariot units, but if you're using them, you're just not really getting into enough character if you ask me. Nothing else really to say on that, since in combat, they really are as simple as big monsters that run as fast and hard as they can at the enemy. The last of the elves, and these could not be more different than the other two. Whilst they can inhabit settlements, they only really want to focus on the magical forests scattered around the map and the settlements that surround them. Their entire faction focus is on capturing these forests and growing them to max size to complete rituals and gain bonuses towards the central Oak of Ages to unlock the full potential of the faction. To assist with this, they have map-wide travel between those magical forests, meaning you can zip around the map in the span of a single turn like a madman. They also take an alternate approach to combat and choose to play more sneakily than most. Their ranged units are their greatest asset, with Waystalkers being one of the best ranged units in the game with skirmishing capability, high damage, and sneakiness that makes them nearly impossible to track down. Alongside this, they also have a large number of powerful infantry units to hold the enemy back, forest spirits and monsters prepared to defend their homelands alongside you. If any, their playstyle is a skirmishing flank, but since it's so unique to them, it's really hard to put a name on it. The Warriors of Chaos, the running joke for the last 5+ years of Warhammer games. Still, they haven't received a single update to change their terrible faction to this day, and with Warhammer 3 on the horizon, it's looking like they're not going to get anything until that. Their faction is the first of the hordes, and it shows, since it is really all they have. Unlike the Beastmen, they pay for their units and upkeep, meaning you have constant economic pressure to constantly fight to replenish your ever-draining gold reserves. They also spread chaos corruption, but we all know that doesn't really do anything, so that's all I'll say about that. In battle, it's much the same story as campaign. Half-baked faction with a half-baked roster with little gems of greatness here and there hidden in the ocean of poo. They have a decent front line with high armor and eventually high damage, but not much to assist them aside from a couple of fairly mid-range monsters on one singular artillery unit. Granted, it's a bloody great artillery unit, but still, it's just one. Aside from this, they have a spot of cav, both ranged and melee, but none of it lands incredibly well. Let us pray they receive some love in Warhammer 3 because it really has been too long without even a tweak. Okay, that about wraps up this video. I'd like to thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed, then be sure to leave it a like. Leave a comment down below. Tell me how you like to play your favourite faction. I'd love to hear it. If you want to see more content like this, then do consider subscribing to the channel. New videos coming out every single week, and I'd really appreciate it. I'd like to take this time to thank all supporters of the channel, in particular Kobe Said So, and it's your boy LC, their wonderful support at the Unclean Ones tier. One more time, thank you so very much for watching, and for now, I've been COLONELDAMNEDERS, and I will see you next turn.